Well, welcome to another episode of Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. We deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital. They do Zoom as well, which we're doing again today. And they've got over 25 lenders on their panel. My guest today is a former colleague of mine at the ABC and one of the nicest men I've ever met in sports broadcasting. Always there to help you, and an outstanding swimming commentator, as well as being a very good rugby union commentator as well. He could call anything, but swimming was what he was best known for at 6 Olympic Games for the ABC, starting back in 1988. His last one was in 2008. It's great to catch up with Gerry Collins. Gerry, welcome to the program. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Dan. As the great rugby league coach Wayne Bennett has often said when introduced in a grand way like that, I can't wait to hear myself speak.
And then after that, Gerry hardly said a word, did he?
Yeah. So it's always a good reply. But thanks for that nice opening. Yeah, good on you.
Well, Gerry, you've had an outstanding career. Obviously, you're not broadcasting the Olympics anymore, but I organised this with you a couple of weeks ago, and you said, absolutely, Dan, it'd be great to catch up, which I really appreciate. But can we wait till the end of the swimming, which we've done? The swimming is just finished. Outstanding performance by the Australians.
Yes, indeed. To win 7 gold medals is always a good performance, and it's right up there as level with Athens in 2004, and of course just one behind Tokyo, and one behind Melbourne and 2 behind Tokyo.
So they're expected to go pretty well. Do you think they did better than anticipated, or do you think they could have done a little bit more? I mean, it was all the women were superb. I mean, if we had a chance in the 100 metres and just had all our athletes who perform well on that 100 metres in the trials, we could have actually had 8 Australians in the final of the women's 100 metres, couldn't have we, Gerry?
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, there are always the restrictions anyway. But look, I think Australia has done very well. And I think that there were people who said they're expecting too much, but I think that most of the opinions that I heard were pretty well spot on. This was a really good team. It is a really good team. And they performed like a really good team. They've come up with 7 gold medals, which is right up there with the best that Australia has achieved. And the only thing you can do better than that, of course, is to exceed it. That might come in future Olympic Games. And who's to know that this is not a part of a new building process. But of course, the team changes from Olympics to Olympics. And you can go from, say, a couple of gold medals to winning 9. So they've proven that over the years. And I know that when I started calling Olympics, the first Olympics was Seoul, and Australia won 1 gold medal. The previous Olympics in '84 in Los Angeles, it was 1 gold medal. In my second Olympics in '92 in Barcelona, it was 1 gold medal. And then in '96, it was 2 gold medals. So it was a slow process. But then it was having the home Olympic Games in Sydney that really made all the difference. And suddenly Australia, really improved at home, but then they continued that overseas as well. And getting the 7 in Athens in 2004 was a significant achievement for the Australians.
When you look at it, Gerry, why do you think our women are so strong? I mean, not saying our men are not. I mean, great win by Cameron McAvoy in the 50-metre freestyle, and that's a great story in itself. But
oh, absolutely, we've got to spend time with that. Yeah,
well, yeah, I'm sure we will. I can just see you frothing at the mouth, waiting for that. But I mean, our women are just so strong, aren't they? I mean, right across the field, to win 1 gold medal is outstanding. But for someone like Kaylee McEwen to win the 100, 200. And then manage to do it again at the next Olympic Games is a sensational performance, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. And she is just an out-and-out superstar. There's no doubt about it, Kaylee McEwen. And, and of course, what we've seen is the end of Emma McKeon's marvellous career as well. Yeah. Our most successful Olympian, in swimming. So that's really a career to celebrate. and to see her finish hers as well with another medal for Australia on the last day is fitting tribute, I think, to Emma McKeon's incredible performances. But why are the women strong? You can never guess what's going to happen. There have been times when we've had strong men's teams, and other times when we're struggling for both men and women. It's never easy, and that's the thing about the Olympic Games. Not only do you have to have strength, you have to have depth, and that depth has been there with the women, and in the past it's been there with the men. But you think of Sydney, and we'll look in more detail, of course, at Sydney, but the strength of the men's team there was very handy for Australia.
Gerry Collins is my guest, esteemed swimming commentator, broadcast with the ABC for many years, friend and colleague of mine as well. I'll call him a friend. He may not call me a friend, but I'll certainly call him.
Don't be silly, Dan. Of course you are.
Thank you, Gerry.
Always enjoyed working with you.
Thank you, Gerry. We're here for Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, and the areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, and also debt consolidation. Looking at Cameron McAvoy, obviously that gave you a lot of joy after what he went through 8 years ago when the young buck beat him, Cole Chalmers, and he was obviously very disappointed with that. He thought about getting out of the sport, but he's come back. I mean, that is a story of magnificent redemption, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what has always fascinated me, he's a really intelligent man.
Yep.
And I remember he was studying aeronautical engineering. And I thought, what a fascinating study that must be for a swimmer, because the aeronautics, as in the movement of the air around an aeroplane, for example, is so similar to the movement of the water around a body when a person is swimming. And I can imagine that he would have probably been able to use some of his studies to help create, the best and most efficient stroke possible. And the other thing was, he was always so impressive as a man. And then to find that he essentially had walked away from it all, but then to come back in the way that he did, and he has decided that he will do it his way. So rather than traditional coaching, he's coached himself and has come up with his way of preparing for an Olympic Games. He comes to these games, and I'm pretty sure that it's unlikely that this will be his last because of what he's achieved. I'm sure he'll come back and have another in 4 years' time as well in LA. So he's just been one of those swimmers that I always admired watching him compete, and then to see him do this, to come back from from a stage where he must have been questioning everything about his swimming career. So it's been, for me, I think, one of the real highlights of, as far as stories are concerned, at these Olympics.
Gerry, you know the sport like the back of your hand. The fact that Cam McAvoy, as you say, has been coaching himself, which I wasn't aware of, would the dynamics change much, or how would he get used to the dynamics? He's obviously a very smart man, as you mentioned as well. When he goes into the Australian team and there are coaches there, does he still keep doing what he's doing? Do they have to fit in with his program, or does he have to fit in with their program?
Well, I'm not close enough to the team to know that. I'm not sure how he organises his coaching process and whatever. But the fact that he's doing something different that he wanted to do, and that he's come up with the training process that he has, speaks volumes about him. But he'd be the sort of, he knows what he's doing, and he knows the importance of team as well, don't worry. So he would be fitting in with the team, and the team would be fitting in with him, absolutely. And usually when you go into a team like that, you'll have various coaches, because your personal coach, for example, might not be your coach in the Australian team, but you're allocated to other coaches, and you would fit in with those. And I don't think that he would have too much trouble fitting in with anyone.
Just on the women, we've spoken about how good Molly O'Callaghan is, Ariana Titmus, we've mentioned, and the list goes on. Obviously, Emma McKeon, and also Kaylee McEwen, after winning back-to-back 100, 200 metres backstrokes. How do they compare to some of the great female swimmers that you broadcast throughout your 6 Olympic Games, and there's some wonderful names. Madam Butterfly, Susie O'Neill, Sam Riley, Liesl Jones, Jodie Henry, Gian Rooney, and Petria Thomas, along with Libby Trickett.
Yes, they've all been wonderful women, and they have done fantastic things for Australia. It's impossible really to compare another or one particular meet with another. But the thing is that this team, because of the people that have come together, so Ariarne Titmus, she's in her prime at the moment, and it's been wonderful to see her. The thing I love about Ariarne is the supreme confidence that she has shown through this whole meet. And she goes out, and you always have this feeling that she'll do the job. Even when she had the impossibly, I suppose, tough job in the end, in the 800 metres freestyle of trying to haul in Katie Ledecky. She worked and worked to do that. And I think that she tried putting pressure on Katie early, and Katie Ledecky's a swimmer who always likes to lead and doesn't like to surrender the lead. And you could think that, well, maybe that's a weakness I can work on. And perhaps, I don't know what thinking was, but I wouldn't be surprised if she wasn't trying to put pressure on that 800. And then even the way in any way annoyed you, but the same pace, of course, just performed magnificently in winning that 800 metres. But if in what wasn't the race of the century, the 400 metres freestyle, Ariarne came through with the victory, winning it in 3:57.49 with Summer McIntosh second and Katie Ledecky third.
I mean, you look at someone like Katie Ledecky, she's a superstar. Summer McIntosh is coming, but Katie Ledecky will go down as an all-time great, and I suppose Ariarne Titmus will too. And you think Summer McIntosh, with the start she's made, only being a teenager from Canada, there's some wonderful swimmers there, aren't there?
Yeah, the world's at her feet. But what we do know is, from Olympic experience, is that you can be as you can hit the world scene very quickly, but maintaining that over the years is very, very hard to do. And there are not a lot even who can go through to, say, a third Olympic Games. But what we have seen is this group of women that have been able to stick together for some time. And in the process, along comes somebody like Molly O'Callaghan, wins the 100 metres at the World Championships in the lead up to these Olympic Games. And suddenly we have another bright star. And she goes in and joins a team that already has Ariarne Titmus, that already has Emma McKeon, and the other good swimmers that have been a part of this Australian team. And, it's wonderful. It's the thing that you do know for sure is that the world changes, the top swimmers change, and it can depend on those who are able to stick around. So for Ledecky to be winning the same event at 4 Olympic Games, I mean, that's extraordinary.
It'll probably never be done, will it? Again, you think?
It's been done. So anything that's been done can be done again, and even things that haven't been done before can be done.
Yes, that's a good point.
And that's the beauty of Olympic swimming. It's the beauty of the Olympics, that there is so much drama, there is so much excitement, and it provides something for everybody. And I mean, from my point of view, I just can't believe that I've led the life that I have, which enabled me to call swimming at 6 Olympic Games for the ABC. And I'll be forever grateful for the ABC for those opportunities that came my way.
Gerry Collins is with me for Dashing Games Olympic Adventures for Aussie Homelines. We're talking all things swimming in his spectacular career. As he's just said, he went to 6 Olympic Games and called some magnificent races and some magnificent gold medals. There's also, Gerry, the brutality of the Olympic Games as well. I mean, we were just discussing off air about the unfortunate demise of the Australian women's hockey team finishing on top in their pool and they're out the quarterfinals. They dominated their pool, but they're gone. So they've got to wait another 4 years. I mean, not only in hockey, but happening in swimming and all sports. But I suppose that's the beauty of it again, isn't it?
Yes, but that thing that you mentioned, they've got to wait 4 years. And you can imagine if you miss a gold medal by 100th of a second,
yep,
it's 4 years before you can get that revenge, before you can have another go at doing it, and just for your own self-satisfaction. I feel for anybody who would lose a gold medal by 100th of a second, but there have been plenty of them over the years. So, it just shows how tough it is. And for those who are able to win multiple golds and to come back to multiple Olympics, that is one huge achievement. I think anybody who becomes an Olympian must surely look back on their lives and think what an achievement that was, even though it might have been young, in their young years. But to be an Olympian means that you have to do an enormous amount of work. It means that you have to have amazing ability. It means that you have to be a very, very good worker and work hard and listen and learn. All of those developmental things that are important for all athletes.
Now, I was lucky enough to broadcast a lot of tennis, and I had the great Roger Federer. I broadcast a lot throughout the Australian Opens and Rafael Nadal and the start of Novak Djokovic's career. You were lucky enough to have a gentleman called Michael Phelps, who made his debut at the Olympics as a 15-year-old. He made the final in the butterfly. Did you think then he was going to be as good as he was, Gerry?
No, I didn't know. I didn't know too much about him, and he wasn't featuring then as he was within 8 or so years. So in 2008, he was unbelievable, and I'm thinking here, where do you start to talk about Michael Phelps? But I'll make it personal and go back further to my first games in 1988, because there you had Matt Biondi, who had smashed onto the world scene. He, in the lead up to the 88 Olympic Games, he was the superstar and on whom so much was expected from the United States. And they were saying that, that this man is capable of winning the famous 7 gold medals. So could he do it? His first race was the 200 meters freestyle. And in that race, he had some great opposition, including Michael Gross and Artur Voidat and a young Australian called Duncan Armstrong. And we now know what happened, that Duncan Armstrong won that race, and Matt Biondi, finished in 3rd spot. And then he had the 100 meters butterfly, and he looked like he was going to win it, but right on the line, Anthony Nesty from Suriname,
Yes,
we had to look up where that was when it happened, and Anthony Nesty just touched him out. So he was beaten in the 100 butterfly. He then went on and won those other 5 events and claimed 5 gold medals. But back home, they were saying, well, he didn't get his 7 gold medals. He didn't match Mark Spitz. And so he went home to the United States with 5 gold medals, a silver and a bronze, as a failure.
Pretty good Olympic Games for anyone, I would have thought. I mean,
absolutely, of course it was. But
yeah.
I mean, that shows how expectations of a nation, expectations of individuals and family and everything can make the Olympians' life that much harder. That's why you'll hear them talking about they have to put all that out of their mind, and that might not always be an easy thing to do. But we've seen those things, and so for Michael Phelps then in 2008, they were saying he's not only going to win 7, he's going to win 8. And there were some of those events that were so close that he only just won. but he had that superb ability to hit the wall, and he did it, and he won 8 gold medals. So as you said, to be able to call the 8 gold medals of the one and only Michael Phelps, boy, that was an exciting time. It was a pretty exciting Olympics all around, the 2008 Olympics. So it was fabulous, and to be there, to see him do it, and to see his incredible swimming skills was something again that I look back and think, wow, how lucky am I?
Geography lesson, Gerry. Where is Suriname?
It's I seem to recall it's in Central America. I think it is.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'd never heard of it either. I mean,
No. And Norman May and I were looking at each other after, Anthony Nesty, Suriname, and in the studio, Bruce Webster,
yeah,
who was a great researcher, and I suddenly heard in my ears Alan Marks, our producer, saying, "Cross to Bruce Webster in the studio." And I thought, oh, okay. So I crossed to Bruce Webster, and he had all the details about Suriname, what its population was, where it was placed, and so on. Yeah, all those little learning experiences that you're suddenly faced with when you're broadcasting Olympic Games.
just on Michael Phelps. I mean, he was 15, as we said, in 2000. He then started winning big events, Pan Pacs, World
Yes,
Championships. So at the age of 19, he was probably ready, wasn't he, to start having an impact, which he did in Athens.
yes, exactly. And again, he was what he showed in Athens was he was on the scene there and then. And for us, fortunately, when it came to the 400 metres freestyle, we had Ian Thorpe still, and of course, Thorpe's wonderful Sydney Olympic Games, where he won the 400 metres freestyle on the opening night and then anchored the 4x100 freestyle relay. That, Dan, was, I think, perhaps the most extraordinary atmosphere that I've ever been in. And even when you hear the replay, you think, my God, the noise of that crowd was extraordinary. And just like in Paris this year, they had this big area. It's an indoor pool, and it's enclosed. And so the atmosphere is that much better. And anybody who was on that opening night of swimming at the Sydney Olympic Games, they took home some amazing memories. There were lots of other amazing memories, of course, to come out of that.
We're going to jump all over the place, Gerry. I've got so many questions to ask you. It's great to have Gerry Collins with us for Dashing Games Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loan to do with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city and doing Zoom like we are now. Just on that race, it was the first time Australia won the 4x100 metres relay. Gary Hall Jr., good luck to him. He came out and said, we're going to smash the Aussies like guitars. Just wonderful theatre. Did you and Norman, and we know Norman, the late, great Norman May, and we'll get to him shortly, was one of the great cheerleaders for Australian sport. We loved him. Who'll ever forget the 1980 call of gold, 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 Australia for the Mean Machine? Did you guys honestly think Australia could win that race?
Oh, we were ever the optimists. As you said, I mean, Norman, did so much work for the Australian Olympic Committee, helping to raise money for the athletes. He was always very positive from an Australian point of view. You could say biased, perhaps, but the flame of Australia burnt in Norman's heart. There's no doubt about that, and he loved it, absolutely loved it. We were just set for this race, and not only that, as Norman and I were joined by Mark Stockwell, the former Australian sprinter who won silver in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And he, of course, knew Rowdy Gaines. And it was Rowdy Gaines who beat him in the 100 metres freestyle. Rowdy Gaines getting a flying start. And poor old Mark had to make up the distance, and he very nearly got there. So they had this great rivalry that, Rowdy Gaines was part of the NBC broadcasting team, and they were probably about 5 or 6 meters from where we were, and it was on from well before the race started between the commentary teams.
Really?
With Mark, Mark saying, the Australians will beat the Americans, but they were giving us back. No, you remember the smashed guitars and so forth. And so, I mean, that was a lovely little side play that we had, but little did we know the drama that would come in that race, because on every leg of the relay, the lead changed.
Yeah, it did.
It was a race from go to woe, and that last leg of the relay with Ian Thorpe chasing down Gary Hall Jr. was amazing. And as I said, the crowd going crazy, the atmosphere of the pool, it was unbelievable. And it certainly provided Australia with the win in the history of swimming, as far as I'm concerned, of Australia at the Olympic Games, because the US dominated it for so long. They were unbeaten. And finally, in Sydney, the right place for it to be, as in Australia, Australia beat the United States, and it gave us all a huge thrill. It gave the whole nation a huge thrill, and it started those Olympic Games with a bang. And from then on, if there wasn't interest before, there certainly was afterwards. And that was something that Ian Thorpe did in the lead up to that. You know, he won the World Championships over in Perth in 1998. He won the Pan Pacifics in Sydney in 1999. Yes. And each time he broke the 400 meters world record. And the publicity, as in newspapers, radio, television, and television ratings, were just going through the roof. And he did such a job to promote the Sydney Olympic Games, Ian Thorpe, just by himself. But then on the night, to put on such an incredible performance, which probably then impacted on him. For example, we all thought that he'd win the 200 freestyle, but he didn't. And you just wonder about how much pressure goes on these swimmers and how much it impacts on them. Something that they couldn't do, say, on the third night, they might well have done on the second night. So especially for any swimmers who have multiple events, you always think, that is one huge job and one huge responsibility.
And I mean, you look at the trials 4 years later, Gerry, you make a very good point here. When he fell off the blocks, maybe there was just pressure on, because we all thought, he's going to qualify. No problems at all. And he fell off the blocks, and you thought, well, that's unforeseen, a bit like Shane Kelly back at 1996 in the 1K time trial in the cycling.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, Dan, that, again, I've been talking, and I'll continue to talk about incredible drama. I was there at the pool for the heats of that morning.
Yep.
At the 400 free. And the heats is a time for sitting around, taking it easy. Everything's pretty predictable, especially, 400 freestyle. Thorpe will swim, he'll qualify. There's no pressure on here whatsoever. But as soon as he just got the wobbles, the shock went through me, because I knew that, not all that long prior to that, FINA had created the rule that there would be just one start and one start only. There'd be no false starts, and that you have to go when the starting signal goes. And you could see him start to falter, and he's falling. And I thought, no, they'll have to disqualify him. And in he went, and then I could hear discussions all around me. What are they going to do? But I'm thinking that they've only got one choice. They must disqualify him. That was the rule. And so he was disqualified. And fortunately, of course, he was able to go back and swim the event, and also other events as well in Athens. But and what happened as well, once he went in the water and he was disqualified, my phone went berserk. I had people, and ABC television from Sydney were racing out with a camera. Yeah. I had the BBC radio on the phone in no time, and it was extraordinary. And and of course, it was then, some months essentially before that, it was sorted so that he would be able to swim the event.
I remember people coming to our office and said he got Gerry Collins' number. And I
Yeah,
didn't know.
yeah,
And they said, I was in Melbourne at the time, and they said, Ian Thorpe's just fallen off the blocks in the heats. Oh, hell.
yeah,
Here
yeah.
it is. And I thought, oh, you'll be flat out. And I think I might have rang you and said, you're going to be flat out. He said, Dan, you said, Dan, I already am. So, yeah, that was an amazing time. Do you think, looking back, Gerry, that he should have been allowed to have swum in that? They made a judgment to move a swimmer out and put him in, or do you think you just at the end of the
day? No. And the swimmer, I've got a mental block at the moment. He stood aside. He was a good friend, which was a hell of a sacrifice for him to do, because he was entitled to the swim.
So there was no pressure on him to stand aside.
Well, I don't know about any pressures. So I don't know the exact full story. I don't know whether the full story has ever come out, but I'm pretty sure that he stood aside.
If it was anyone else, do you think he would have stood aside?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, and if it were anybody else, they might be different. It might be somebody who would say, and they're entitled to say it, I earned the right to represent Australia, and correct. I'm not budging. Yeah.
Oh, well, that was very nice of you. Now, I just want to quickly go back. Mark Stockwell and Rowdy Gaines. Did Rowdy say anything after Australia won? I'm sure Mark did. I've met Mark a couple of times. I'm sure he did not shut up.
No, Mark certainly reminded him of so much for smashing us like guitars, and of course down on the pool deck the guys had been playing air guitar.
Yeah, they had.
It was an atmosphere, Dan. It was an extraordinary atmosphere. And when we walked out of there, I mean, how could you possibly feel after watching Ian Thorpe win that 400 metres, breaking the world record, smashing a really strong field, and then that amazing relay, and go home without being the most elated that you've ever been in your life, more than likely, because it was unbelievable.
I remember Norman May used to say in Athens in 2004, and it was stinking hot, as we know, right in the middle of summer, 5 Heinekens, young Dan, 5 Heinekens, young Dan. It's in the second week in particular after swimming had ended. Were there 5 VBs, Gerry, 5 VBs for you and Norman after that race that night?
Well, that's a funny story, really, that Norman and I went to a bar in the Olympic area, out at Homebush.
Yes.
On the first night, and then on the second night, the first thing Norman said to me, "We're not going to that bar tonight. I have found a hotel at Strathfield, and the beers are only so much a schooner, and so we're going there, and from there you can go home and I can go home as well." And so that's what we did. So Norman was always on the lookout for a bargain as well, and of course he called himself the pensioner from Potts Point, and so he loved the fact that he was able to find a cheap beer where we could go after major events.
Gerry Collins is with us, esteemed swimming commentator, 6 Olympic Games for Aussie Home Loans, for Dashing Downs Olympic Adventures, and their areas of expertise include first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, and personal loans. Gerry, you started as a teacher. Yeah. You're from Newcastle in northern New South Wales. How did you get into broadcasting?
Dan, growing up, I used to listen to radio a lot. I loved radio, and I thought I'd like to be a disc jockey. So I had this plan that I would want to be a disc jockey. I actually went to a radio station in Newcastle, and the manager quite willingly spoke to me, which I thought was fantastic.
Good.
And he said to me, you should get an education first, because there's not a lot of money in radio for young people. And I thought, oh, okay. It still burnt inside me, but I went off and became a school teacher. And then I got a teaching appointment in the wild west of New South Wales. I don't know, have you heard of Burt? the great outback town of Burke in New South Wales.
I have.
It's
Yes.
yeah, and if you've been to the back of Burke, you've got to go back again. So I
in
had
the middle of nowhere, Gerry. In the middle.
Yeah. Well, if it was in the middle of nowhere, the last little village before you get to Burke was Byrock, and I got Byrock Public School. There were 8 kids in the school,
right?
And I was the only teacher. Wow. That was it, and it was an interesting time. In that first year, I got sick, and I went to the doctor, and he said, "You've got pneumonia. I'm putting you in Burke Hospital." I was in Burke Hospital for a week. It just happened to be during that week that the Edinburgh Commonwealth Games of 1970 were on, and I'm in hospital, so I could sleep all through the day and listen to the ABC's coverage, because there was no television out in Burke in those days. I listened to the ABC's coverage on the radio. And I can remember lying in hospital thinking, oh, wouldn't it be great to be with those blokes calling that? That was 1970. In 1986, the Commonwealth Games were back in Edinburgh. And guess who was on the commentary team at my first games?
Gerry Collins. Wow.
I could not believe that. And I still look back and think, isn't that extraordinary how your life turns out? You just don't know. And I've often said, if somebody had come up and tapped me on the shoulder when I was teaching at Byrock and said, you'll be calling gold medals for Australia all around the world, you'll be calling a Rugby World Cup win for the Wallabies and that sort of thing, I would have said, no, you're joking. It couldn't happen, but it did happen.
You got your start, didn't you, with the ABC in Canberra? Is that right? And then you ended up in Brisbane.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I had managed to. I was doing, while I was teaching, a fair bit of part-time media, including radio reports and things like that. And then I got the opportunity in 1983 to call Group 11 Rugby League on the commercial station 2DU in Dubbo. Right. I did that for that season. By the end of that season, this job was advertised in Canberra for a sports broadcaster. The Canberra Raiders had just come into the NRL competition, and I thought, well, you never know. I'll throw my hat into the ring and managed to get the job. So I went down there, and I can still remember thinking, well, I came here expecting I'd be calling rugby league, and that's fabulous. But suddenly realised, hey, I'm with the ABC. We do everything.
Yes.
Cricket, rugby league, you name it, swimming. And I suppose I'd been a swimmer all my life and loved swimming. And I played a lot of rugby union. And it was amazing how I saw them as my main sports. And they were the ones that I had really strong interests in and so forth. And then as my career turned out, it was through swimming and rugby that I ended up getting my highlights.
So Norman's last Olympics was 84, but he stayed on as your expert, didn't he? So did you both call in Edinburgh in 86, or did you do most of the calling?
Yeah. He didn't become my expert then, because in 1986 at the Edinburgh Commonwealth Games, it was the last Commonwealth Games where the ABC did television.
Correct.
And so Norman was doing the swimming on television, and there'd been a bit of a mix-up with the swimming commentary position, and I think that finally they made a decision that I could go to do the Australian Championships in Adelaide, and I was told that if I did a reasonable job there, I'd be considered for the position in Edinburgh. And subsequently, I managed to get the job as the Edinburgh radio commentator with Norman as the television commentator. So that put on big pressure then when the 88 Olympics came around, because again, I knew that they were going to get Norman back. And I thought, well, will this mean that I won't be doing the swimming at the 88 Olympics? And so I waited with bated breath and with a whole lot of nerves, the announcement of the broadcast team, when I got notification that I was going to do the swimming. And again, something looking back, I think, wow, I almost overcome with emotion with the fact that I got that job then, and was able to do it right through until the end of my ABC career.
And Norman was okay with that. I mean, he was your right hand man. It was a good
He,
man.
he was he was fantastic. And I learned so much from Norman. He wasn't the sort of person who would say, "Hey, Gerry, do this, do that." It's just by watching him. He is the greatest ad-libber that I've ever seen. He could time, if he was asked to do 2 minutes, he would take a few notes and he would ad-lib it and bring it out right on the 2 minutes. Unbelievable, without a watch in front of him. You know, I mean, we became reliant on the wonderful facilities that were available to us. But in '86, at that first Commonwealth Games, I had Forbes Carlyle as my expert commentator. Right. And Forbes was fabulous. But of course, we had no computers, no nothing. Yeah. And so when you're trying to work out whether swimmers are going to qualify for the final or not, I mean, you've also got to be doing your broadcasting, talking about things that are coming up and so forth. And it's impossible to work out where people are placed as far as their position is concerned, and what time the fourth swimmer has to swim, for example, in the final heat to determine whether or not they make it. And Forbes was fabulous, so he was doing it all for me. But then fairly quickly, fortunately for me, computers started to come into it, and in 1996 was when we really had the commentator computers sitting at your desk in your commentary position.
And the other thing about 1996, and I remember I was still working at 3TS Coal Lake. I got the cadetship the next year, and I was doing breakfast radio news reading and writing news, local news in the Coal Lake region. And I would often listen to the coverage because being in Atlanta, a lot of the finals were on in the morning in Australia.
That's right.
That was when the IBC was set up, and Alan Marks was a great producer, as you know, a genius in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that set up television screens. So you'd call off tube unless it was the big events like the swimming, like the basketball, like the athletics. And it just indicated how much the coverage had changed and how much, I suppose, more technologically advanced the coverage had become, Gerry.
Yes, and to the degree that they're able to nowadays sit in huge studios with large screens as opposed to a little TV screen in a little box that we did things from. So that's how the world has changed. And Dan, I'm going to throw you a question, but I know you've got a fantastic mind and memory.
Yes, Gerry.
But there's one Australian gold medal that I called, which was not swimming.
I was going to ask you about this. Glenn Mitchell and I have spoken about it already.
The answer, have you? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it was actually Taekwondo Lauren Burns.
Yes, that's right.
I had a day off, and I got a call from someone to say, "I hear you have notes on every single sport." And I said, "Yeah, I've got my bag." And I said, "Look, I'll just leave the notes." I said, "Oh, well, Gerry or someone," because I'd help Wilco out, Gerry, with the archery when he was about to do a soccer match with Roger Wills. And Peter Longman said to him, "Wilco, forget about the soccer. You got to do the archery." And Wilco said, "What's that?" He said, "We got Simon Fairweather about to win a gold medal at sea."
Yeah.
And he said, "Has anyone got any information on archery?" I said, "Yeah, well, Glenn Mitchell told me to have all the notes, Wilco." So I had the notes and left them there. But no, I remember that, Gerry. What was that experience like?
It was amazing, and how it unfolded was, again, as you said, Alan Marks, our wonderful producer. He came to me because after the swimming was over, I usually had a job of putting together the highlights of the games, and that would be a 1 hour program on the final night. Yes. And so I was working away on that, and Marksy came into the studio where I was and said, "Gerry, there's an Australian going pretty well in a semi-final of the Taekwondo. Can you go and watch the rest of it and give us a report on it?" So I went in and watched this sport that I hadn't watched before, and saw that she was going really well, Lauren Burns, and so I took notes and so forth, and went out and said to Alan, "Okay, I can give you a couple of minutes." So I gave him 2 minutes about her win in that semi-final, and he said, Yeah, well, the fun, and I can't remember whether it was that night or whether it was the next day, but he said,
It was
that's
a
good.
Thursday afternoon. Thursday afternoon, I remember.
Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, it was. Yep.
Do you know when the semi-final was?
I think
Must
the
have been
semi-final was the night before.
night before. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think
So
so.
I had overnight. Anyway, from the moment he said you're going to call it, I was then on the run. I was looking for anybody that had anything on him, and so your notes were probably there.
Yeah.
And also there was somebody from uh, one of the commercial stations that was working with us as well, who he had a Victorian, I think, who had a whole lot of information on her. I rang a section manager for Taekwondo and asked him where he was. I said, "Are you anywhere near a screen?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Great. I'm sitting at a screen watching the bout that's on at the moment. Can you tell me significant things? Can you tell me moves? Describe a particular action of a Taekwondo athlete." And so it was just this, learn it all very, very quickly. And then I got to call the final. And I have to admit that I absolutely loved it. It was fantastic. And at the end of it, I had called my 10th Australian gold medal, and it was in Taekwondo. And I'm very, very proud of it. Indeed, a few years ago, I was driving along in my car, and I suddenly thought, that voice sounds familiar. And I turned it up. It was me calling the Taekwondo was being replayed on grandstand. So,
I mean, just on that, and I had to do a lot of those sports because I was generally in the three Olympics I did. I was in the studio.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's where you did a fantastic job, as a master of all.
Yeah, well, not a master of all, I would say a jack of all trades, master at none. But I mean, I'm Australia's only handball commentator, foremost handball commentator, Gerry, because no one else caught it because we had a team in 2000. But that's what you do. And the adrenaline pumps when you do a sport you know very little about. I had to do the weightlifting in 2000 when Smokey Dawson lost his voice. And Marty said, as I came out of the booth, "What do you know about weightlifting, Dan?" "Oh, a little bit, Marty." I won't tell you exactly what I said when he said to me, "Well, you're in there now in 30 seconds. There are a few words I said, and you've just got to go, don't you? You've got no chance to really think about it. You've just got to go. You watch what's in front of you. If it's a sport you don't know, correct?
Yep, that's right. And I got to speak very quickly to Lauren Burns later that night after she won the gold when she came into the Seven Studios. And then quite a few years later, I was at a sports breakfast in Brisbane and ended up sitting alongside her. Wow. And had a wonderful catch up. And I still look back on it as a magic moment in my life, not just in my Olympic career.
Did you like her old man's music, Ronnie? He had a big hit in the 60s.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I was a Ronnie Burns fan.
Correct. Gerry Collins is our guest, foremost Taekwondo and swimming commentator. Great to chat about his Taekwondo gold medal he called of Lauren Burns, the first time that was a sport at the Olympic Games in Sydney in 2000. We're here for Dashing Down to Olympic Adventures and Aussie Home Loans. Gerry, need to ask you about Kieran Perkins. He won gold comfortably in 1992. He was red-hot favourite in 1996. He had a pretty ordinary heat swim, didn't he? And only just qualified. What was going through your mind when you were calling that heat, knowing, gee, he's in a bit of trouble here?
Well, I had a long history with Kieran because in trying to work out the years now, but anyway, I lived in Brisbane and was working for the ABC in Brisbane. And I've always been a swimmer, as I said. I used to swim in an outdoor pool through summer, and I used to run in winter. I had a few leg problems, and so I decided I was going to swim through the year. I heard that the University of Queensland pool was now heated, and you could swim there. It was an outdoor heated pool, and of course in Brisbane, an outdoor heated pool is not such a bad thing.
No.
It was, so I turn up for my first morning there, and I thought, who's that? I thought, that's John Carew. I thought, Kieran. I knew that they had trained at Dunlop Park, but they had made the decision to move there as well, probably because of the fact that he could swim all year round. And so they had only just started there. And so I'd see them every day. And in the build-up to 1996, for example, I went over to the Pan Pacific Swimming Championships in Atlanta in 1995.
Yeah.
And got to know the place pretty well. But all along, I was seeing Kieran nearly every day, so I knew him pretty well. And indeed, when he swam that heat of the 400 meters with a disappointing time, and I remember that John Carew, I went to interview him, and he was surrounded by the media, so I just stood at the back and was listening to what he had to say. When somebody said, well, they said to him, well, you know him pretty well, so, you know, what is it? Why was he not able to, you know, perform as we know Kieran Perkins can perform? And he just shrugged his shoulders and said, I don't know. And then he looked at me and he said, Gerry, you see him every day. What do you think? And all I could say was, John, if you don't know, I can assure you I certainly can't help you. So, and then when he, in that heat swim, when he realised how close he'd gone to missing out, it obviously came as a shock, but he was struggling. And I always remember going to the pool and walking in, and I saw the Australian team in the warm-up pool, and we were able to watch it from behind a fence.
Yeah.
But there was this person standing there who just seemed to have an aura about him, and I thought, who is it? And as I got close, it was Greg Norman.
Yeah.
And Greg Norman spoke to him that morning, and I later said to him, what did he say to you? He said, he didn't say anything very much. He just said, you're a champion, you can do it. And he said it was amazing the impact that had. And then that final, as you said, that Saturday morning back home in Australia, the number of people who've told me what they were doing, which shop they were in, etc., as they were listening to it all, you know, stopped in their car to listen to the finish of that race. But he just went for it. And you thought that this might be Dan Kowalski's chance. You know, Dan was running second to Kieran for some time, and Dan was swimming pretty well at the time. But I've never seen a man demolish a field like Kieran Perkins could do. And that was how he always raced anyway. I can still remember his 1,500 metres at the Auckland Commonwealth Games in 1994 at age 15. He went out like a rocket, and he destroyed the field, and he was a 15-year-old kid. I think Glenn Houseman actually beat him in that race, but that was the beginning of it. And from then on, you know, Glenn Houseman, who was then to finish second to him in Barcelona in 1992 and give Australia a great 1-2, which was then going to be repeated at various times in the following years as well. It was to see him then go out and destroy that field, even though he was struggling still with some health issues, I think. It was unbelievable. And so many people have said to me, that's got to be your best moment. But, you know, how do you describe your best moment when you think of all the various races that I've called over the years? But certainly it's right up there. And the fact that I did know him well, and then to see him go on to 2000, and in the heats of the 1,500 metres in 2000 in Sydney, the people who paid less money to go to a heat session and saw Kieran Perkins go out and swim the first ever sub 15-minute heat swim at the Olympic Games and put the pressure on Grant Hackett, and Grant has then answered it with an equally really impressive swim, and you knew then this is on. This is the battle for the king of the 1,500 freestyle, and that we were then going to see that in the final. And of course we did, and that's where Grant Hackett came through. He became the new king of the 1,500 free, and that was then the end of Kieran's magnificent career, and having gone so close to getting the three in a row that I know that he would have really wanted. So, to win that Athens one, to make it two in a row there, as we've heard at these Olympics, to be able to defend a title is really a hell of a job, and anybody who does it deserves admiration. Well, Kieran Perkins had our admiration in so many ways, and was such a leader. And as I mentioned about Thorpe, creating all the publicity in the lead up to the 2000 Olympic Games, Kieran did that as well, because the way that he, dominated Australian swimming, and as a result, swimming benefited from him.
Just on that 1996 race, and he's in lane 8, when did you think, gee, he's on today, this could be something special? Was it early in the race?
I think so, yeah, because he went off. He did a typical Kieran race. As I said, put the pressure on, off he went, as he did as a 15-year-old in Auckland. Really went for it. And he would blow them out of the water. But you thought, well, if he is struggling, if he's got some issue, you would think, well, it might hit him late in the race. But no, and I think Norman made a comment something like, as they turned with 50 metres to go, Norman said, "This is going to be the best 50 metres of my life coming up here." And of course, nobody could match Norman's enthusiasm. Absolutely. And it was, and so to be in that situation, and what I was able to do, whereas you're calling who's where and whatever, was to devote that 50 metres to Kieran Perkins, to the man, to what he'd done for Australian swimming, to him hitting the wall, jumping out, and I nearly had a heart attack then when he jumped out of the water. And you were supposed to stay in the water until you're cleared to go, and he jumped out of the pool with, "Oh, don't disqualify him." But of course that didn't happen, and it all finished very successfully for Kieran there. He had the disappointment of a silver, I suppose, but there's no disappointment. There's no lack of respect for Kieran for finishing a career with 2 golds and a silver in exactly the same event.
And there's also
especially one as tough as the 1500.
And also we have to give credit, and he probably doesn't get enough credit. He swam really well in the heat, but Daniel Kowalski in 1996 did a great job as well. Does he get enough credit for the great race that he swam himself?
Yeah.
Because we were all thinking about what Kieran did when we didn't think he could do it from
Sure.
being so far away in lane 8.
Well, I think anybody who knows Dan Kowalski knows that he certainly got the credit from those close to him. His performance was outstanding, and he met Kieran Perkins on one of Kieran's days. And if anybody prior to that meeting Kieran on one of his days when he switched on and just going for it, there was no way that Dan could get into that fight, get into the race, because he was, and maybe he would have been thinking, "Oh, Kieran hopefully will slow down, I'll catch him." But no, he didn't ever look like slowing down. And I was always a big fan of Dan Kowalski's, and I still am. And again, a few years ago, I was in Sydney walking along and ran into Dan Kowalski, and it was great to catch up with him. Fantastic swimmer for Australia, and I think we probably should think about the fact that people like Dan Kowalski help create the greatness of Kieran Perkins by the pressure that they put on, and by the fact that they're there, that they're teammates as well. All of those little things. Competition within a team is very important, and it's always also important, of course, to have a feeling of a team. And that was one thing that used to be a part of the Australian ethos, is that we must swim as a team, and they would put emphasis on relays and so forth, so that you get this team feeling, so that it's not just an individual event, that there's a broader picture than that. And I think that Kieran Perkins showed that with his, his determination and how that benefited the others, but how the competition with Dan Kowalski and others on Kieran's way through, and going back to Glenn Houseman. I mean, Kieran got the gold and Glenn Houseman the silver in Barcelona in '92. That was Kieran's first 1500 goal.
Gerry Collins is my guest for Dashing Gans Olympic Adventures. Their areas of expertise include purchasing a property for Aussie home loans, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio and refinancing. Gerry, just a few more, if I may. Susie O'Neill. Susie O'Neill's was a very quiet, shy, retiring type. She didn't give a lot in the media. Are you surprised she's had such a successful media career as a breakfast announcer? And did she get enough credit for the great swimmer that she was?
Oh, she gets credit in my mind, and I think that she does all round. Look, I have always been one of the greatest fans of Susie O'Neill. Wonderful swimmer, absolutely wonderful swimmer, and she has that sweet nature when you're talking to her. But I always remember that she was at the Pan Pacific Swimming Championships in 1995 in Atlanta. She was suddenly disqualified, and she could not believe it. And I remember her pushing a chair. I think this is sweet Susie O'Neill, and you realised Susie is tough. She's really tough, and she is competitive. And so she knew that if the pressure was on, that she would perform. And she did that on numerous occasions. So in 1996, she won the first 200 meters butterfly medal. The 200 meters butterfly gold medal. She had won in '92 in Barcelona the bronze medal. And when they went past me, there were three of them in line, and Susie was in front. I was only 2 meters, 3 meters from the wall, out from the wall, but it was bang, 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 3 touches, and Susie finished third and got the bronze medal in that. Then, of course, she was the hot favourite in Sydney as well for that gold medal, and we know that didn't happen. But prior to that, she had the 200 meters freestyle, and she qualified fastest for the final. And everybody thought, wow, Susie, fantastic. The person who found it hardest to believe was Susie herself. Mm. And she found herself questioning that she could do it. And she said that she that night, she couldn't sleep. She couldn't face the fact that she had to do this 200 freestyle the next day. She rang her husband, Cliff, and said, I can't swim that race. And he said, what do you mean? She said, I just can't do it. I can't face swimming that race. And he said, what are you talking about? It's just a swimming race. And she said, when he said that, all of a sudden she calmed down and of course went out and won that 200 freestyle. But then when it came to the 200 butterfly, unfortunately for Susie, it didn't quite come out the way that she would have liked. And she still managed, of course, to get the silver medal behind Misty Hyman of the United States. And so that she finished, therefore, with all 3 butterfly medals, a gold, silver, and bronze.
And outstanding.
And Dan, you said about her broadcasting career.
Yep.
Guess who gave her her first broadcasting job?
Yes, you did, Gerry.
Because
and she did a good job in her own inimitable way, didn't she? I mean, she didn't sort of know when to come in originally, which a lot of people don't. But when she did come in, she knew what she was doing and she knew what to say. I mean, she was quite good. And I thought, gee, I didn't think she had that in her. And certainly with her her radio career, I've heard her a few times just online, and she's as funny as a wheel. She's a beauty.
Oh yeah, she's a wonderful person, and the thing is that comes through. Her personality comes through, and Australians have always loved Susie O'Neill.
Yeah,
and so what happened with that in 2002 at the Commonwealth Games in Manchester. She was there, but she had retired after the Sydney Olympics, and she said to me one night, she said, "Gerry, is there any chance you could get me a ticket to the finals?" And I thought about it. I thought very quickly. I said, "Yeah, Susie, but you'd have to do commentary for me." And she said, "Oh, no." I said, "Go on, you can do it. I think you'd be fantastic." And she did, and so that's when she started working with us, and she was just heaven to work with. Of course, we worked on the my last Olympics then in 2008. Calling that women's 4x200 meter freestyle gold medal for Australia, and working with Susie was fabulous. And a great swimmer, unbelievable person, and she still swims. And when I go to Brisbane, of course, I've got kids and grandkids in Brisbane. Yeah. I swim at the pool where she swims, and see her occasionally as well. Sorry, hold on. I'll come back to that a little bit later, because a little mind block.
No, she's an absolute beauty, Susie O'Neill. Now, I want to ask you, obviously that race means a lot to you, that gold medal 2008 when Australia, the girls were able to win that relay. What is it, Gerry, about the Australian-American rivalry in swimming, especially at the Olympic Games? What makes it so special?
It goes back for so long. When you think that 1956, of course, was the what you might call the awakening games for Australia.
Yeah.
And the indication to the world that we are a swimming nation. We swimming means so much to us. Most of us live on the coast of Australia. We love beaches and being in the water, and we've got really good climate and so on. And the performance of that Australian team there in 1956 was just amazing. I'm old enough to remember the 56 Olympic Games, and so to be able to have spoken to and interviewed some of the stars from that 56 Games has been a real pleasure too. But it's the Americans have been so dominant, and when the Americans are dominant, they can make it public, and so naturally any opposition wants to beat them, and the end result was we've had a great rivalry, and it came to its point really in 2000 with that men's 4x100 on the first night of the Sydney Olympic Games, and when Australia won it, that gave us all a huge boost. And I think now Australians are happy to take on Americans. It doesn't matter what the event at an Olympic Games, but it's great to have that rivalry, isn't it?
Certainly is. So you're not surprised that all the American media outlets have got them on top of or have had them on top of the medal tally, even though they've had less gold medals than China, less gold medals than Australia, and even less gold medals than France, of which Marchand, their swimming superstar, won all of them.
Yes, that's right. But that's the way it's always been. And it's often intrigued me that you go to Britain, you go to many different places, and they're talking about medals. They don't talk about golds, whereas I think it's good that we have this emphasis on gold medals. So the emphasis is on doing your absolute best and getting to the absolute top. And that's good. And so we know that when they put the medal tally up, it's based on number of golds. So it's the Americans who are putting it around the other way, basing it on total number of medals.
Just on that, though, I mean, if you win a silver and a bronze at Olympic Games, nothing to be certainly disappointed about, is it? I mean, they're great achievements, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And when you think about it, there have been so many near misses for Australia over the years. Ones who've missed by, as I said, 100th of a second, but ended up with a silver medal, and others who don't get to have that experience. So it's a huge privilege for an Olympian to be competing for his country. And I doubt that there would be any one of them who wouldn't acknowledge that. And for them to take that responsibility and go and perform at their absolute best, often producing personal bests in difficult circumstances, and then coming through and winning no matter what medal it is. But even making a final is an achievement. Making a semi-final is also an achievement. These Australians who perform for us as ordinary Australians, we should be forever grateful for what they've done in their lives, for what they achieve, and the impact that it has on us.
Gerry, if I can finish, and I really appreciate your time for Dashing Gans Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, on the fact that it's been Australia and America, but many other countries are starting to get better and better and better, including the Chinese. There was a bit of controversy about Kyle Chalmers' race, the men's 100-metre final, and the Chinese swimmer that won by more than a second. Now, Brett Hawke, former Australian swimmer who's lived in America for a long time now, I heard him do an interview or a press conference in his hybrid American accent, and he could not understand how that swimmer could win by 1 second. Are you a bit concerned about the Chinese and whether they're going about it in the right way in a sport that you love?
It's not the first time that we've had concerns about Chinese swimmers, of course. I was at the Rome World Championships in 1994 when those famous images of Chinese swimmers. Unfortunately, drugs are a fact of international sport, and we have to put our trust in the international organisations to do their absolute best to ensure that nobody who is cheating gets to compete. But we do know that it's happened over the years, and that I've got little doubt that there've been plenty who haven't been caught. And that's very sad to know that. And we do know that there are Australian athletes and swimmers and so forth through the years who have been cheated out of medals because of others using drugs. But I don't know what the answer is. I mean, people have said, well, open it up, let them use whatever they like. In my opinion, well, you've got to put some sort of a lead on it anyway, because otherwise people would just kill themselves. And so what's wrong with having it? You have to swim as a natural person, not boosted with with some drug in you. And the job continues to be a very tough one, but all of those international sporting bodies have to stay on top of this. And it's always been a race, the scientists against the cheats, and the scientists working for the international bodies have to be in front. But that's just not always possible, and it's sad to see. And the other thing is, of course, Dan, that it's possible that swim was fine, that he did something extraordinary. We don't know.
Did you raise your eyebrows though when you saw the time and saw that he finished 1 second ahead of the rest of the field, including Olympic champion in Kyle Chalmers?
Of course, yeah. And you could see Kyle Chalmers' reaction as well, sitting back well away from him. It's a very tough one that has been there right from the very beginning. I mean, I went to the World Championships in Madrid in 1986, just after the Commonwealth Games. Yep. All of the women's events were won by East Germans.
Yes.
Now that was, and I can remember shaking my head, but Christian Otto won the 100 there, and then she went on and won the 100 at the Seoul Olympics in 1988. And, all of those East Germans who were, and many of them probably didn't even realise that what was happening to them, that it was administered by essentially by the state. And it was wrong, and it's still wrong. It's happened, and it will still happen. And that has been, I would say, the lowest part of my life, is having to watch those situations where you realise that people are being cheated here, and people are gaining gold medals that they don't deserve.
Can I take you back to 1996 just on that? My late father, was Irish. and he didn't watch.
With a name like Gerry Collins, of course, and I've got Irish ancestry as well.
I would have thought with
Irish.
a name like Gerry Lonergan, couldn't be anything else but Irish, could it?
There you go. Yeah.
From Tipperary, his family, and he watched the race or a couple of the races that Michelle Smith won.
Oh,
and he said, "She's Irish." Yeah, she's won a few gold medals, Dad. Myself, my brother said. Oh, I reckon there's something fishy about that. And we said, "What do you mean?" Just like that. He had hardly watched a minute. He said, "Well, there are no pools in Ireland." Dad didn't know how to swim, Gerry, until he came out here as a 10-pound pom in 1974.
There was no 50-metre pool still then.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So did you think there was something fishy about her performances? Obviously, it's been found out that there was, but did you think there was something fishy, considering no one had heard much about her until she started dominating the Olympics?
I did, Dan, and it was in the lead up to the 96 Olympics. I used to get the world rankings sent to me by mail. And, as known as snail mail. Well, it was snail mail well and truly, because all of a sudden, only about a year out from the Atlanta Olympics, we had the internet. And in the ABC in Brisbane, there was one desk which had the internet on it.
Wow.
And I thought, wow. And somebody told me you can actually get the world rankings on the internet, as in when they go up and then they're available to you immediately. And so I started checking world rankings on this one office desk in the Brisbane offices of the ABC. And the first time I looked there, as the fastest time of the year at that stage in the 400 metres freestyle, Michelle Smith, Ireland. And I looked and thought, no, can't be right. Who is she? Where's she come from? Haven't heard of her. But there it was. Check again. Yeah, she was there. And you thought, that was my thought immediately. No, you can't come from nowhere like that. There's got to be a reason. And of course, then at the 96 Olympic Games, again, there was a case of getting away with it, that, she was subsequently shown to have failed drug tests, but she won those gold medals there in 96. And it just wasn't right, and it should never have happened. And I'm a bit surprised in some of those cases where there hasn't been, that they didn't follow up and go back and take some action on it.
And when you were calling those races with Norman, no doubt, in Atlanta, and she was winning the races, were you thinking, I'm still not convinced that she's that good, this girl?
Yeah, you can think that, but you've got to be careful about saying it.
Of course.
Yeah. So all you end up doing is looking at each other, raising your eyebrows, and there's nothing else you can do, because essentially that is a legal swim for FINA. They've allowed these swimmers to swim. They've done drug checks and so forth. And as I said, the smarties who are finding ways of getting around drug testing, they're winning. And there've been times, of course, that's the thing that I can remember when, after that East German period, there was a little bit of a lull, and it was harder. You wouldn't see many world records broken. Interesting, they've talked about the pool, but you can even wonder now that there weren't a lot of world records broken in Paris. Does that say something? And possibly it does. It might not be the depth of the pool that they're talking about. It might not be just that. But no sooner had the East German dominance gone than the Chinese dominance started again in those early 90s, and now it's possible that it's happening again. But we did get evidence that the Chinese were doing things, and several of them were banned, and they seem to have buckled under and swum seriously, but always there's somewhere along the line there'll be one or two or three or whatever who just make you question.
I remember telling Dad, "Oh, Michelle Smith's been disqualified." Yeah, of course. He didn't bat an eyelid, Gerry. He just kept going, doing what he was doing. He said, "Couldn't possibly. We don't have swimming pool."
Gerry O'Leary, a good man, Gerry O'Leary.
Yes, that's
sorry, Gerry O'Lonergan.
Yes. Well, he just picked it up straight away, and again, he didn't bat an eyelid then too. And I thought, really? And it all played out. One more, Gerry. When you're calling a race, and you touched on it earlier about how close it can be. We saw in the 100 metres in athletics on the track that it was virtually a dead heat between the American and the Jamaican. The American was then awarded very narrowly indeed by the slimmest of margins. How do you know who to go for? And if you're not sure, do you just say not sure, or do you just say could be a dead heat?
I've tended to go with what my naked eye tells me.
Yep.
And I can remember because swimming is like athletics. So I find it fascinating. Do you know for how long they've actually been doing this? That awarding it using the thousandth of a second?
No, I don't.
Athletics,
no.
Yeah, because in swimming, they do have timing to a thousandth of a second,
right?
But they made a decision that they would take it to the hundredth of a second, and if there's two swimmers who have got the same time at a hundredth of a second, well then it'll be a dead heat. So, but if you're watching a swimming race and you see a dead heat, have a look at the first name that comes up on the board, because that's the winner.
Right.
But officially it is then a dead heat. And that's because it is recording the thousandths of a second, and so the first name up. And I remember one just Australian Championship. It was a breaststroke event. I've forgotten the names, but let's call them Smith and Jones. Yeah. And I've done a call that went something like, into the wall they go, Smith and Jones. Smith, no Jones, no dead heat. And so what had happened was, I thought it was Smith. Jones's name has come up first, and so I've then thought, oh, Jones has won it. But then I've seen that Smith's time is exactly the same, and so it was a dead heat. And in actual fact, it didn't sound too bad as a call then. I'd gone so-and-so, no, so-and-so, no, dead heat.
Well, I mean, Bruce McAvaney, when Debbie Flintoff King won gold in 1988, I think the late great David Thirsty Morrow, and of course that was very sad for all of us a few weeks ago.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I went to David's funeral in Sydney, and yes, it was sad to lose, a great colleague and a wonderful sports broadcaster, fantastic sports broadcaster, David. Yeah, because David started with the ABC in 1980. And I was the next one to join, and so we were the young guns of going off to the games and so forth. We had some great times together, and shared so many experiences.
Because I remember Bruce saying, "Don't think not sure about Debbie Flintoff King," but David and Peter Hatfield were actually confident. I mean, Debbie herself, and I've interviewed her for our program, Dashing Gowns Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, Gerry, and she was always confident. But I mean, you just don't know, do you? I mean, sometimes, and you've just got to say something. I mean, Matt Hill and Gerard have both said dead heat on the 100 metres in the athletics this morning. So at the end of the day, if you say dead heat, that's probably the best way to go. Gerry, I've really appreciated chatting to you. We could chat all night. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've always, as I say, been very nice to me in my time at the ABC. I remember I was just struggling a bit during the Athens Olympics, and after the swimming, I hung around with you, and you're happy for me to hang around and just be there. And you've always been such a good person to be around, a great person to learn from. It's been wonderful hearing your journey and talking about swimming, one of the great sports at the Olympic Games. And thanks so much for joining us for Dashing Gowns Olympic Adventures. For Aussie Home Loans, to deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city. Areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out, construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, personal loans, and they've got over 25 lenders on their panel. Keep enjoying the Olympics, and I look forward to catching up with you soon. Thanks so much, Gerry.
Good on you, Dan. Thanks very much.